Welcome, everyone, to the Cymulate cybersecurity broadcast. I'm Dave Klein. Today, we're going to talk about how C-level execs are reducing cyber business risk with Chuck Brooks. Most industries out there today, regardless of size and content, are dependent on IT for business success. And so much so that business continuity has become the main reason for cybersecurity taking the main stage today, which is really important. And we'll go talk about that and among other things. And hello, Chuck, how are you doing today?
Great. How about yourself?
Awesome. I thought we would start, with some facts around the fact that when you look at risk to the world, drought, famine, war, that cybersecurity is often considered above that, which is really kind of critical. And I want to talk about your background because I think that's kind of important for this conversation.
Sure. Well, first of all, yeah, I think cyber risk has grown. I could actually correlate that to my background. I had worked years back for almost a decade for the late Senator Arlen Specter on Capitol Hill doing technology issues and security issues. And back then, it really wasn't really cyber. It was, weapons, terrorism, etc. And then I was asked to go to help set up a startup called Department of Homeland Security. And I was one of the first 100 people hired. I think I got this big plaque from Governor Ridge.
You were one of the first 100.
I think so, because they call it a plank holder, and it's a big thing. All the people there, and I got in there. I remember going to it was all over, but it was a warehouse, John, on G Street, and when we got there, it was Secret Service and Coast Guard people detailed there. We helped set up the first thing we needed to set up was the Office of Legislative Affairs. So of course, you have to answer to Congress. And the second thing was that I got involved in with the Science and Technology Directorate. It was the only newly created part of DHS, and I got to be the Director of Legislative Affairs there. And then that's where I saw the transition more. It was still early, but we're talking about CBRNE, chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear explosives. But cyber sort of got added, and everyone's starting to look at cybersecurity, everything connected. It was early on, and since then in my career, where I've gone into the corporate world. After that, I went to SRA, which is now GDIT. To Xerox, where I was Vice President of Homeland Security there, and to General Dynamics Mission Systems, where I was a growth strategist for cybersecurity there, in technologies, emerging technologies. It all has really been focused more on the digital and the accompanying technologies that secure digital or allow communications, etc. So the world has really transferred, and we've gone from a physical, brick and mortar economy to a digital economy pretty quickly. And unfortunately, we weren't prepared for the security part of it. But at least in my experiences there, in my work, and continuing now with teaching at Georgetown and doing my consulting, in writing, you see more and more of the gaps and what's necessary for the C-suite to look at nowadays to protect themselves.
Yeah, it's fascinating. In some ways, the whole 2020 COVID thing has accelerated this. Has really taken it to the point where and in some ways there's a success story here. If there is a success story in that dumpster fire that was 2020, was the fact that everyone, not just in the United States, but around the world, for the most part, we were able to work remotely, right? And that means that the technology has been adopted across the world to allow us to do that. So in some ways that's positive. But you're right, there's all sorts of gaps and things like that. How did we get to the point where most risk consultants will say that cybersecurity is above things like again, famine, disease, and war?
Because I think you have be able to better project stuff with, obviously with war and disease. It's a horrible outcome, but it's there. And I would say COVID was more of a black swan in that sense. Even though we always prepared and thought we'd get a pandemic, we never really prepared for it. We had sort of studies about it, but never a pandemic. But besides that, cybersecurity is so pervasive now. It's so connected to every business, every government agency, everything we do in space exploration, everything we do in medical technologies. So it's ubiquitous. And so that's why it's become the highest problem area, because everything we do touches it. It's horrible when you have a famine. It's terrible when you do have other, but this touches everybody. And it's the attack surface and number of people using the internet now are growing exponentially every year. It's billions every year, and so it's every country, it's everywhere, it's the globe. So cybersecurity really is the one threat I think that should be most alarming to everyone out there.
True, very much so, very much so. And we talk about, from this evolving threat matrix and where we are today, and we think about how we traditionally handled cybersecurity issues, right? From external audits, pen testing, and red teams. What were some of the challenges that we saw in taking those methods that kind of worked in the past to now?
Well, I think there are a lot of challenges. One is, and I think the biggest thing is really machine learning capabilities have grown from the adversaries, and it's very difficult just to recognize all those things by doing particularly non-automated pen testing and a lot
Right.
of the other things. The speed of the amount of information volume out there, and it's not just the attackers and adversaries. It could be the DevOps. It could be problems in the code, all kinds of things that came up, and it just wasn't expansive enough. It's good that you do pen testing, and it's good you look at that, but it really needs to be more. You really need to look beyond the gaps. You got to really find the unexpected things. Not just things that are in databases that confront you. And so that's why I like the idea of simulation, including that up front, looking where all your potential gaps are, and then you could bring in your teams and your experts to sort of fill those gaps. So that's why I think in combination with pen testing and all the new automated technologies that are coming out with that, simulation is essential.
I agree with it. I think the old ways of doing things were very manual. And for those who had the resources, the larger corporations, global corporations and government entities, they would bring in, armies of people to do these things in a manual fashion and hopefully feel like they're successful, right? At the same time, even for the ones that have had the resources, it was always a situation of chasing a moving item, right? The idea, as you said, with our adversaries doing all sorts of things, machine learning, changing everything daily, working in groups, right, and specialties and things like that. They've gotten to the point where they've just been able to basically evolve day by day. I do a new show every Tuesday, and by the time I get to that Tuesday, literally I have about 80 stories I want to talk about, and I have only the time to talk about a single handful, right? And often then even just shortly. It's just amazing at the amount of change that occurs with the threat vectors and threat actors daily. And then there's the vulnerabilities, right? The idea of the vulnerabilities change all the time. And the fact that we're so technology dependent that our own enterprises change daily, right? So you have we call enterprise drift, all new gaps and stuff like that. So it doesn't even work for the highly resourced. And I think about all the other people who are not the highly resourced, right? The ones who had the shoestring budget, who may get a third-party audit once a year. It's just not effective.
Yeah, no, you need to bring in outside expertise. I think in this, just you have to even the playing field. You can't invent everything yourself, and part of the problem is when you try and do a lot of adding tools, you have too many tools and you can't orchestrate them. So I think if you're a company looking at where to go, you really want to look at upfront your pen testing options and your simulation options, and look at the companies that are doing that. There are not that many in simulation, as I know. There's only a few, and then you could at least get it from up front. Look where your gaps are immediate, that can be patched, that can be changed. Exactly. So that you need to do before you get to everything else. Because it doesn't do good to build endpoints and all kinds of stuff around you if you're corrupted already inside.
The other big thing to talk about when you think about the traditional methods versus what we're going forward to do is a lot of the traditional methods saw cybersecurity, IT, and business as separate silos, and in some ways competing, right? So the idea would be is you'd show up as the pen tester, the red teamer, and you would do a bunch of tests. You find all sorts of vulnerabilities and things like that. And you say, I really wish I had better help from the IT staff and figuring out where I can talk to and see where I should test, and from the business ideas to know what their goals are. And so often you come up with these gigantic tests, and to the IT staff, it's like, well, you're not really accurate. We're actually okay here, but not here. But you're not giving me prescriptive advice to fix. And then the business is going like, both you guys are talking tech speak. You're not talking in terms of risk or things that I understand. I don't understand the value of what you're doing. Talk to me from a business leadership perspective, the idea of imparting risk.
Yeah, well, I think you really characterized the issue right there. There's silos, and there's no common theme of working together. And I think with risk, one of the first things you have to do is look at the organization itself. who has responsibility for what, who's the communications aspect, who's going to do with the legal, who's going to do with the financial, who's going to do with the obviously the IT issues. And then the real issue is not silo them and tell them you have to do this and this. It's really working together as a team. So you really need a purple team. You need to get together and you need to involve them and educate them. There's no reason that the C-suite and many of the people in sales and marketing positions can't learn basic cybersecurity and requirements. It's not that difficult. They don't need how to learn how to code. There's things that they don't need to worry about or procurement, but they can look at the options they have before them, what's recommended by NIST in their industry or MITRE. They could follow, and get very educated very quick. They could get educated just by reading LinkedIn, some of the posts there. You'll see a lot of examples of what you need to do as a C-suite. But it really is not rocket science. It really is practical. So I think the fact that you get everyone talking and also delineating their roles and specialties and educating others in what they're doing. So if something does happen and you have an incident response plan in place, then it goes through smoothly. And it could be from everything from planning for a ransomware attack to being taken down by a distributed denial service attack. I mean, you need to be prepared. It's just the real world today. I mean, just like, where you were operating a bank a few years ago, you got to be prepared. You had a security guard out there in front of you to protect, make sure that nothing happens. And then bank alarms if something happens. Just with security, with cybersecurity, you have to have a fortress.
Yeah, agreed. And it's not only just having a fortress, but action plans, right? The
plan, yes.
Right, the idea, and you practice them. So there's so many other industries in the world where this is a common thing, right? Before you get behind the wheel of a car, that car has been tested by crash test dummies and put against other cars, offset, head-on, side collision to make sure you're going to be safe, right? The same is true for IT today, right? So the idea of doing purple teaming combines the idea of taking offensive testing and simulations and attacking the environment and finding where your gaps and stuff are, and then giving that prescriptive remediation, not just to the IT staff, but to the business, right? And that's two different things, right? So to the IT staff, you're speaking technical, but you need to have EDR tuned for this. You need to take away these privileges. Need to do multi-factor authentication. But for the executives, it's the higher level. This is the risk we had. Here's how we reduced it. Right? And you're right. There's room for learning some of that cybersecurity language and technical language, but it's a much different level, right? It's this risk by not having multi-factor authentication means that we have this much threat and elevated risk, and here's how we lowered it and stuff like that. So it's more related to those terms than the technical terms and things like that, which is important. The other big thing I think, and you had hit on this too, it's intercommunication. Right, it's not a conflict model. It's one where teams are working together, and in some ways are educating each other.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I think that's a great. What you just said. It is a non-conflict model. It's really lessons learned too, because you're also talking about issues of reputation. Particularly in a company, if you do get breached, what do you do? Maybe not the end all, maybe the end all if you're a small business, but if you're a larger business, you probably have some options there. And if you're a public company, you want to protect your valuation too. So there are different factors that I think you have to explore together. And then by doing what you're talking about with the gamification, the simulation, all those elements of looking where your gaps are and looking for remediations to it, you could develop then a strategy plan from that. That would be the next step. I think it really is the risk management element first, but the strategy plan comes after you determine where you need to build your, as I said, the fortress, where you need to and have the roles defined. So I think you need to start there.
Very good. One of the things also that you had worked on before was the idea of a cybersecurity hub, right? And I should tell the people out there, there's a great article that Chuck did that is in tandem with this wonderful broadcast. And we find that here it is here, a cybersecurity risk management strategy for the C-suite. And we're going to basically put a link in the chat section so you can get that article. But in it, you mentioned a cybersecurity hub. Why don't you talk about that a little bit? Tell me what that means.
Yeah, my idea is, with most companies, you have a security operations center or you have an IT shop, and that's fine. And particularly for the bigger companies that can afford it and staff it, et cetera. But most companies, even really small businesses, really should have what they call a cybersecurity hub, and the hub should be several executives that are tasked to look into the security requirements around cybersecurity, and work together as a group, see where they need to hire. Do they need to go for outside expertise? Do you need to bring in experienced board members who have cybersecurity expertise in the C-suite? And then do you have all those things we just talked about? Do you have the risk management understanding of what you need to do for your business? Do you have a security plan, strategy plan, how to respond to it? And do you have anyone evaluating all your tools and looking at the threats out there? So you want to also do that. You want to make sure that you don't just go buy everything out there that says they can stop everything, but look at where you really need to enforce, whether it be encryption or whether it be a strong firewall. And then the final thing I think with all these is really the most basic thing that threatens us all is a lack of cybersecurity hygiene. We often get phished because of social engineering, or it happens to everybody. Well, it happens to CEOs every day. And we really need to basically have an idea of what the adversaries and hackers are doing out there, and the criminal gangs particularly, who are sharing the tools to hack. And so if you have a hub like this, you could also have a function where you have a regular meeting where you share some of the intelligence. This is what's happening in ransomware right now. They're using this vector to get in, and we should look at doing something or bringing someone in that can protect us here, or health education. Education is being attacked. Lincoln College went out of business after over 100 years just last week because of a ransomware attack. So what we need, what lessons learned should we go from those kind of institutions? So I think there's a lot of value in just looking and researching and talking on it, because whether you like it or not, we're moving very quickly in a digital world. It's going to be more important to understand the connectivity and the security implications of that connectivity in everything we do, no matter what profession you're in. And also that goes into the social media too, what you share publicly. So I think that having that kind of hub in a company, first of all, it's not really a cost item. It's really a socialization item and a strategy item. You could add to it. You could bring in some professionals too if you want to augment it. But I mean, most companies just can't afford a security operations center, and a hub is sort of a substitute in a way for those small and medium businesses that don't have the resources but want to be prepared or better prepared.
Excellent. John Grace asked the question here: what metrics are important to C-level executives in understanding their?
I think the biggest metric right now has been, recently, what happens if we don't pay the ransomware? Are we going to be operating, for the next week or so? That's been more recent. The ransomware has been around for a long time, just because of the cryptocurrency and the payment. It's lessened with the Ukraine-Russian war because the focus of some of these groups now is different, Conti and others. But I think you have to look at what your risk tolerances are, and what your the metrics are. If you're taking out in a ransomware attack, what does it do to your revenue model? Do you go out of business? Real important metrics to look at. But also, I think you want to look at again, you go back to the simulation stuff and the penetration testing, and you got to go is the metrics. You say, what risks do we have? As a company that say we're operating a store, a retail store, what risk is in the payment system? It is employees using dual devices and smartphones. And if you do that, I think there's no real universal metrics for everybody, but I think there's specific metrics for every business. And the real metrics is what risks they can overcome, what risks they need to prevent, and then you develop those metrics accordingly.
Right, and I would add that often what you do is you take different components of your IT and look at damage and duration. So if this disappeared, so it disappeared meaning the servers are wiped. How long would it take to recover? What would be the damage to the business, right? Would the business stop? Would the business be able to continue? Right, that's a big thing, right? If this database was in charge of the point of sale systems, are you totally down? Do you go to manual? If you're in a situation where a chemical plant, if the machines go down, is the case you have to clean out the machines first, so you have basically a 24-day delay. There's also things you can figure out. All deals with damage and duration and impact of the business, which is really kind of critical.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of small businesses can't afford any kind of a breach, and a good percentage of them go out of business when they are breached. So I think if they look at the basic metrics, is again go back to have cyber hygiene and have encryption and strong firewalls, policies in place to prevent yourself from being low-hanging fruit, because you'll victimize at one point and you won't be around anymore.
Absolutely. And we have another question here from Andre Kovac. What do you see as proportional in terms of investment, financial and human resources into cyber defense and SMB? And this is kind of important. And from here, we could talk about it. And you talked a little bit about, having a cyber hub. Let's talk about more about what can the small players do, because we had talked about this in the prep, that this is kind of important.
Yeah, I try not to look at cybersecurity as a cost item now. I look at it as an investment. I think that the conversation in the past has been, we can't afford this. This is not really critical. We need to put it into marketing or sales first. And companies can't afford to do that anymore. They have to look at their survival and operations. And so cybersecurity should not be looked at as a cost item. Having said that, it's really difficult to come down with an exact formula for everybody. And I think we go back to the matrix we were talking about is once you determine your risk acceptance rate and really where the gaps are from doing these penetration tests and simulations first, then you can determine what you need to buy. Do you need better endpoints? Do you need to go to the cloud and have encrypted? It may be different paths for everybody, but I think the main thing is that you have to look at cybersecurity again is not really necessarily being a cost, but really being an essential requirement and imperative for being in business now and in the future.
It definitely does. And in fact, in Cymulate, we talked about offensive testing and attack simulations as a way to find and map risk and to remediate in a prioritized fashion. One of the things we have coming up, everyone watching, is a webinar, which we're going to talk about. So we are a beginner to cybersecurity, and we're advanced in cybersecurity, and talk about a maturity model to adopt this kind of purple teaming across the spectrum, from the beginners to the advanced. And now that's coming up on, let me see here, I have it right here, on May 24th. Let me go ahead and pop the banner here so you can see what it looks like here. This is going to be this webinar here, the invisible player to every security team, regardless of budget and skills. So again, it's a maturity model looking from you have to crawl before you walk before you run before you fly, going into the maturity levels and saying, hey, here's the use cases. If you're starting out, I would recommend you do. Here's the use cases if you're intermediate, and the idea like that. So we have that coming up. So we'll talk more about that in that webinar, which would be great. I'm
looking forward to hearing that one. I'll be a listener on that one. But I love the idea of mapping your risks up front. I mean, really, that's really what I was missing in my statement. Really, you need to map the risks if you want to do any kind of risk metrics.
You map them, and then also it's the idea of you map them and it's continuous, and that you say, what's my trend against that risk map, right? So if I have this acceptable risk policy and I'm over here, I reduce it. Then as, again, the new attack vectors come out or new changes to the environment, we have a new partner who's now in our IT systems. We have a new customer group that's in our systems too. So it's the idea of enterprise drift or threats, and how does that change things? Vulnerabilities, how does that change things, which is kind of important, which is good.
That's important because, again, cybersecurity is not static; it's always changing, and that's really important. I use the fortress analogy because you have reinforced walls in there, but that may not be a good analogy because your threats are always changing in cyber, unlike often like physical attacks.
It's almost like real fortresses. So yeah. People who know me know I love guitar. Besides cybersecurity, I love guitars and I love archaeology. And one of the things that I found very interesting is most cultures in the Stone Age started to get forts, right? They would find a hill and they put wood around them, and that was called a hill fort. And that's in all different cultures across the world. And over time, even large cities like London, like Rome, like Paris, they all had big walls and fortresses. And as time went on, as they became interconnected, right, these walls got in the way of commerce and travel and other things. And so some ways, you're right, maybe the fortress isn't the right answer, because the point is we're all moving around, it's almost like we're all like drones hovering above the walls.
Yes.
We were talking. What would be a good story about risk that in your private life that you work with recently?
There's a lot of them. I guess a recent one is I was contacted by a biotech company, and that was a pretty interesting case because it really calls attention to some other risks you don't think about, which is really the insider threat, which is really considered the second biggest risk in cybersecurity often, and insider threat doesn't necessarily mean it's deliberate. It could be accidental or negligence, leaving something open, which is really common. But in this case, it was not accidental. It was with one of the executives who exfiltrated data from the company, and it's a pretty common thing. And it's also a lesson, I think, because most companies that don't understand cybersecurity as a priority don't have any kind of strategy up front and policies and procedures for their employees. They don't, overtly say, okay, if you send something to a private email company document, it's a violation, etc. You don't keep this separate or encrypted. Unless you have that, it's difficult to go back and try and regroup and find out what went wrong. But I think part of the problem with risk management in these companies is they just don't have any policy. So having a start, is really the start. And I think this is really maybe the trend in cybersecurity recently because of these high profile breaches like Colonial Pipeline and others, and because of the zero trust movement. I think people are now looking, okay, what do we need to do to start? What are the basics? And that's where risk management comes in. And I think, I'm excited about that trend because I think that's really going to be the most helpful for companies in the future. And they just cannot avoid looking at what they need to do. And in this case, just too little, too late. You have to really do it up front.
Agreed. Absolutely. Being proactive and things like that. We have another question here. This is a very interesting one. David Riddick asks, thoughts on mitigations for a country being a victim of cyber attacks and ransomware, such as occurred in Costa Rica. People who are familiar with this, Costa Rica is majorly affected by a ransomware attack that has really shut down their business. And actually, the president of the country has declared a state of emergency. What's your thoughts on that?
Risk management doesn't just pertain to companies; it pertains to countries too. Costa Rica, has been a peaceful, non-belligerent country and just ripe for attack by the bad guys because they also have a fairly affluent for Latin America too. There's kind of a lot of people vacation there, a lot of banks, a lot of industry and retail shops. Yeah. So expats all over there. So I think again is what happened is because of the use of cryptocurrency now is so prevalent by these organized criminal gangs. They said, we're going after we're going after at the highest levels, and they did because they noticed there was no defenses. And I think in this case, you probably got to look at bilateral help. Following examples, asking the United States government perhaps for some help and what they need to do to build their defenses, to have encryption, to have better detection, surveillance. How to decrypt from the ransomware attacks and protect that because paying is not the way to go, particularly with a country. They're just going to get attacked over and over, and they got to start from beginning, from security by design, and really look at what they need to do as a country because they're not that big, and they should be able to, with the right investment, build the right kind of policies and insert the right kind of technologies to at least keep them more secure.
Definitely. John Grace asks, what companies provide simulation services? Well, John, my company does Cymulate. That's one company. There's other ones like Mandiant and XM Cyber, among others, and you could go check them out on the web to find out more about them. There's a lot of companies out there, and the key with these companies, especially mine, is the concept is that you can create a purple team that not only offensively tests on a continuous basis, but creates the baseline of risk and shows it being reduced, gives you the prescriptive output for the technical staff on how to fix things, as well as explain to the executives, hey, here's the problems and here's the increased risk because of it. And so it's a very easy way to automate and take care of this kind of risk in an easy fashion. It's a great question. So, another thing we talk about a lot is what's coming down the pike, right? And we talk about how 2020 being a dumpster fire that was still something where the world was able to adapt to working remotely. And that was a positive thing, but also means there's more risk with people working remotely as far as to threats to your various applications and your critical crown jewels. You look at the pipeline of things that are going on in the world, and the technology is going more and more and more. On the horizon, there's several technologies that could be real disruptive.
Yeah, there are more than several, but there are several that are close now. And I just saw an announcement today that Google DeepMind or whatever has achieved a new quantum capability, which is a good thing. I think we're a little while off there, but I think in terms of real immediate applications to the cybersecurity, it's probably artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
The next part of machine learning, which is included in it, whatever. But it's really the ability to take the data and analytics and really look at threat analysis and find mitigation for it, etc. Also, to optimize business processes, etc. So artificial intelligence has already been used, and the algorithms are being developed. And so I think we're going to really grow quickly in that area. A lot of investments going into it. We're also getting a 5G backbone, which is now coming online, which means less latency and quicker delivery of information. And data has moved a lot. A lot of it's already moved to the cloud, but it's moving to the edge. So there's a trend there too, where you're going to do a lot of computing from your smartphone. And the interesting analogy that I like to use is that one smartphone has more computing power than all of the computers that we sent NASA used to send people in Apollo to the moon. So we have a capability that's growing exponentially, and all these technologies are tools that are going to take us there faster. Material science too, the type of the size of your phone that now folds or whatever, the screens, the holograms, all this stuff is really exciting, and it's coming quicker. As you mentioned, the COVID stuff gave us time to reflect, and also it showed how easy we can communicate, in distant parts of the world immediately on Zoom and other platforms like this. But it's changed the way we work, and a lot of people are hybrid now, their own individual office. And so they have the same responsibilities as an office. So again, the cyber procedures they need to take and work with their companies are got to be even more secure, I think, because you don't want to be out there alone and attacked. So it's going to be an interesting world, and then you could add things like robotics and biotechnology, that's synthetic biology. All these things coming down the line are very exciting, and I think the kids being raised today won't recognize what the world we're in 40 years from now.
I went to the grocery store 2 nights ago, and was being followed by the robot of the grocery store that apparently is set to look for the shelf for inventory as well for spills. And you're just looking at this thing, and as you're working, you're working trying to get to the different things there. It's kind of crazy. But there's also quantum computing, and what I think is amazing about quantum computing is in some ways it's far off, but as far as encryption, it's not as far off, and that has a lot of ramifications.
It does, because it's also quantum decryption, and one of the things that's happening is, of course, all this data out there, a lot of it's already encrypted, and if a country, an adversary, has the ability to take that data, let's say all the OPM files that were stolen, is a good example. They'll have all the information immediately. Within seconds, if they have a quantum encryption capability. Also, they can use it to communicate securely. So, yeah, these technologies are worrisome in the sense if they get in the wrong hands first, or if there's not equilibrium among the geopolitical powers to prevent someone from getting a dominance that's not Western or democratic. We could be in for some problems. But I think there's more and more attention being paid to that now. And a lot of the particularly with NATO and the United States countries are looking at more and more investments in these technologies, particularly at quantum and artificial intelligence.
Great. And talking about NATO, that brings up a good point. How do looking at the Ukraine and the battles in the Ukraine, and in the beginning days of the battles, you saw things like the Viasat system taken down by the Russians, among other things. How the Russians have done a horrible job. First of all, it's awful what they've done in the Ukraine from a humanitarian perspective, but they're just not seizing the battlefield. How are they doing? What kind of risks do we see? Does that increase the risks for cybersecurity?
I think that the jury's out. There's a lot of interpretations of what happened. Of course, there's a lot of preparation and memos being sent around, particularly look out for business and look out. First, I have to say that the groups, the organized criminal groups that are under the Russian area, I'd say they're not directly controlled by the military, but they have connections to them, are quite capable. They're some of the most they did SolarWinds. They've done a lot of other things, and who knows what else. So you can't underestimate them. They still have the capability to get into critical infrastructure and doom it. And the fact that they were going after a Viasat satellite also shows that that should be a protected area that's been often neglected and is neglected. Particularly lower, smaller satellites. Now that we're moving more to a satellite communication world, we need to protect that in a big way. But I would not, and I think this is more of a tactical issue with the Russians. I think they thought that the war would be over in literally days, and they figure that we're going to knock out their critical infrastructure kinetically anyway. Why bother? It's cyber, but they did some attacks, and so I think we'll see what happens. But their capabilities are still there, and it's not just them. There's North Korea, Iran, and China too, and
Right.
they all have different skills in those capabilities. And then there's a whole criminal enterprises not connected to any of those countries that are flourishing just because of the money involved. Just like organized crime goes anywhere where there's money. So it'd be stupid to be complacent. Saying okay, well, they didn't perform as well as we thought. They didn't do stuff, but it's very limited right there. So we'll see what happens. So
yeah, definitely. One of the things I found one of the stories I covered recently was in Macau, which is kind of the Vegas of Asia. There was a criminal gang that broke into the wireless, very specifically the wireless of the two top hotels, 5-star hotels, to get banking credentials of the big spenders in the game. It's amazing. You're right. The criminals follow the money, and they follow it in unusual and unique ways. The largest bank heist now in history was the North Koreans. I'm sorry, the second largest. The largest was the $1 billion stole by Saddam Hussein during the second Iraqi war. Him and his sons went to the Iraqi National Bank and stole literally $1 billion in U.S. currency, no less. But beyond that, the biggest one is a video game that used cryptocurrency for in-game experience, and it was somewhere to the tune of $650 million. Yeah, it's kind of crazy. Yeah.
It's interesting because a lot of the cryptocurrency, wallets and trading areas are not as well protected, and criminals went there because there's instant money, and and also there's no accountability. So if your account's gone, it's gone, and so that's a problem of not being regulated and operating in a decentralized way. So there's a lot of risk with cryptocurrency still. And it's still money and it's fungible. So the criminals are going to go there and they know who has the money and where, because people often brag about it on social media.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, excellent. Chuck, thank you for joining us today. This has been awesome. We'll be doing this again. Yeah. And folks, in the chat, you see the link to the article, a wonderful article Chuck put together, a kind of a compendium on all the stuff we've discussed. Thanks everyone for joining today. This has been the Cymulate Cybersecurity broadcast. Take care.
Take care. Thank you.
Let's see.